You're listening to the Road to Wisdom podcast, weaving stories told by wonderful minds about all things motherhood, health, intimacy, politics, nature, and everything in between.
Join us on an adventure discovering unique experiences that we can learn from to enhance the ways in which we live.
We are your hosts, Chloe
and Keshia.
Oh, well, ladies, welcome to the Road to Wisdom podcast. We have Molly, Natalie, and Michelle, and the three of you all form Midline Revolution. I'm really excited to talk about this because it's all about oral ties, fascia, and movement, and just kind of looking at things from a different lens when it comes to oral ties. And if you're a parent, you've probably heard of this many, many times.
Tongue ties,
cheek ties, posterior ties. What else do we call it?
Oh, we've heard a lot of it.
Yeah, everything. So I initially came across Michelle a few years ago. She was talking about things from a different light that I haven't heard anyone speak on before. And you've been in the dental industry for, I'm guessing back then when I heard it was 25 years. So I'm guessing closer to 30 or more years now. And whenever I look at your Instagram, I'm like, she's got so many hats on. This woman is doing so many different things. I can't really keep up, but I know it's all really good stuff. So yeah, I just wanted to maybe start with just who you are, Michelle, and your experience of getting your own oral ties revised as an adult and kind of what happened there and how that came to you kind of looking down a different path for how we're treating this.
So, I think what that did for me in the big picture was widen my own lens, because pre-release, I was your typical provider who actually promoted the correlative sequence of what could happen, if ties remained untreated, right? I was that girl. I was that person. I sold those cases, right?
And just for our listeners who haven't experienced this or don't fully understand, what is the current medical way of treating a tongue tie?
The narrative is that these are cells that do not stretch. They're collagen cells that migrate to the midline and they do not stretch. And so therefore they must be cut in order to get functionality of the musculature related to the bone and full muscular function of the lips, the cheeks, the tongue, and to create the potential through muscular movement of a correct dental occlusion. And therefore also the jaw relationship that creates space in the oropharynx behind the tongue, which is the entrance to the airway, the lower airway, right? So that's your big picture. And so the whole narrative related to tongue tie today is that there's oral dysfunction that is related to this non-stretchy collagenous tissue that's required to be cut in order for the pieces to move. That's the narrative, right? And so what that did, I fully investigated that whole field. I helped create a lot of the sequence of care that's used globally now in integrative care. I helped create that years ago. And what my own journey did was, it was a pattern interrupt for me because I was doing everything that was known to be done at the time. And when my frenum was released, what it set off in me was a full neurological collapse that ended up in a ruptured appendix, a collapsed lung, sepsis, and near death. So what I experienced was the positioning of my nervous system at that time. When it caved in, it had no place to stop. there was no structure, there was no uh, uh, back pressure valve or anything for me. It was gone. And that's just mostly a reflection of where I was not resourced as a person. So in my language, I call it too many drains and not enough gains. And so when I was let go to function, I didn't have the power to pull that function off and regulate my nervous system. So everything just shut down. And what that taught me, it was a giant pivot for me. But what it taught me was that the narrative that we have now actually fits into a larger perspective, a bigger timeline that really needs to be considered when we engage with this very simple procedure but very powerful result. So now what I do is I help practitioners like understand this and be able to check their clients, their patients, and address everything that can be addressed before someone actually chooses to do a surgery. So it's not, and a lot of people get this confused because they'll say, well, it's this or this. But I always say it's this and this. Where does this narrative possibly fit into your scenario? Does it or does it not? Let's go in and resource this child. Let's resource the parent. Let's get conscious dyadic moving going on between the mother and the child, get them open and flowing and stable and pushing, from the inside out and grounded and all those other things. And then reevaluate the function and the tissue and see, would this child benefit from it? And then present it as an option. Because, the best sales technique is urgency.
Yeah,
right?
and let's dive into that, because I think I personally haven't experienced any tongue ties or mouth lip ties with my kids, but I've had a lot of friends who have, or even they've just had colicky babies, and a doctor's said, oh, well, it could be a back tongue tie that you can't see, but this is what's making them upset. And there is like this urgency to go and get surgery, and that seems to be the only option that they're given. So can you speak to that, like why they create that urgency, and I guess what would happen if you left it a little longer?
Well, let's presume that there's not an it that we know of to leave, right? So when and one of the things that I teach practitioners is functional exam. So we're not just looking at the anatomy, we're looking at everything it's attached to. We're looking at the nervous system state and the available resources that child has on board to be able to unfurl and open up and move in dynamic ways. So the thinking right now is that tissue is keeping them from doing something. But our experience is, and my experience with working with thousands of babies, is that the ability to move is there. It's just, do we know how to elicit it? And then is there an ability to create the power to run the system? Most of it's a power deficit, and we talk about that in the course. Is how to identify that and how to create power in our children so that they're not overcome by some transient tight tissue, but then their nervous systems can differentiate between, oh, this is a dehydrated, collapsed, tight tissue. And if we get hydration going and movement and flow and energy in it, then it's going to start to loosen up. And then we can actually tell if there's tissue that's not going to move. So there's a differential there we can follow. But what happens now is that we've eliminated the possibilities of variables, and we're like, nope, that's a tie, it must be cut. And then what we're doing is going ahead with surgery in the larger picture and cutting it. And then what happens is these kids have no ability to open and expand and get really dynamic with it and actually create their own trajectory. A lot of them just collapse into themselves because the brain wasn't sending the information to the frame, and there's no power behind it.
And we
Go
have
ahead.
to remember too, this is, Michelle always says it, the tongue tie world is an industry. So it's a moneymaker. It's very expensive. And so certain practitioners and providers create their entire practice based on releasing these ties. So if they have a baby in the chair, from their lens of what they know, they think I'm helping this baby. And they may see a difference if they do the release in what the baby's looking like right before they come in and what the baby looks like when they leave, but they're not following the baby. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times what will happen is the baby will do fantastic for the first 24 to 48 hours. And then afterwards is when you see the crumbling and the falling into themselves. And if they're not prepared. So this, whatever provider it is, they think that they're doing a service, but they're not there for the follow-up. So they don't see the fallout and what happens in the long run with a lot of these kids.
What is happening in the long run for these kids who have been revised?
Multiple releases.
Yeah.
They'll go back and have it done 3 and 4 times. They'll be outsourcing into all kinds of therapeutic modalities with no end in sight. Parents don't get really free of all that until they get autonomous.
Yeah. And then you go into dentistry, like, you know, your young child is in braces or in expanders or in all of these appliances when they're 9 years old. And then it, you know.
And now the industry has grown to where we can put palatal expanders in infants now. We can do that.
Which is crazy.
And so, and I'm not saying it's good, bad, right, or wrong. I'm just saying that what's happening is when we don't empower parents to participate in their child's experience and become educated consumers because they know how their child's body works and the energy system works, and they know how to create, you know, dyadic movement together and use the power of mirroring with their baby and themselves, then they're constantly outsourcing to other people that eventually all of that's, it's going to come to an end. It's not going to actually get them to where they belong. And we know this because, like, when I'm working with craniofacial orthodontics, I've got, you know, tracking kids that have had amazing craniofacial orthodontics, but yet they will not necessarily always get rid of all of the symptoms, or they might relapse. So once the treatment's over, then the collapse takes on over after that. And it's
They can't maintain it.
And they can't maintain it. They don't have the power in their body to support those changes. And that's a big deal. And that's one of the things we address in the course is educating mothers and families, the partner, how to move their children, how to resource their children, the things that are available to them, the fact that tongue tie release is not emergent care. Natalie says this all the time. She's like, we need a solid feeding plan. We need some options, and we need the ability to give them time to co-create this movement so that if there is a release done, they at least have a much better chance at opening into the trajectory than just collapsing onto themselves.
Well, that's interesting because I feel like one of the biggest calls for a release is breastfeeding troubles. So I feel like parents are, you know, especially if you're probably in the obstetrics or the midwifery care or whatever it is where your baby gets weighed every other day and they're like, you're not hitting the mark, you're not getting there, your baby's not getting enough milk. You're clearly like, there's a problem. I think it's a tongue tie or their baby's really fussy. And I think that's the urgency. And so the parents like,
panicking.
Oh my God, my baby's not putting in any weight. They're not thriving. And so they go and, you know, they go down this path. And I kind of feel like that's a tragedy because maybe if only we knew that there were options.
I'd love to just quickly point out what you guys have said that, and this is a take home in just so many areas of the medical system. We are consumers, and it is an industry that makes money, and it is something that we like changing your mindset to believe it that way rather than they are the authority figure and we are this weak, passive,
no clue
people that have to just follow along with the fear mongering and the rush to do surgeries, that there is money behind this. I feel like that's
an excellent point about fear mongering. Not all practitioners are fear mongers. So a practitioner in their integrity is going to hold that standard of empowering the parent and putting choice in their hands. That's the way, when I was in the dental office, that's the way we practiced. These are your options. These are the things I'd like for you to do to prepare your child. Let's also use this as a differential diagnosis. You know, if we can get this moving and this happens and this begins to open and the nervous system begins to change, I don't really think that this is a true, you know, formulation of tissue that would require to be cut. If we can hydrate this and get it moving and all of that, I think it's really more in the neck. It's really more in the hips. It's really about how they're breathing or not breathing at the breast that's actually creating the tension. Let's work on that.
And they're like, the practitioners we want to find, isn't it? That's like,
cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're assessing the breathing. They're assessing the body posture at the breast. Just because there are symptoms doesn't mean there's a tie. And so the way I teach practitioners is how to suss that out and put things where they belong, not just lump it in as a reason to say, oh, well, there's all these symptoms, it must be a tie. No, there's a physiologic, there's a functional, there's a morphologic assessment that goes with fully knowing like what this child is bringing to the table. So whenever these guys get a baby, the first thing they're looking at is, does this body move in a way that allows this child to breathe well and feed well? Because kids will sacrifice feeding to breathe. It's a competition. Yeah. So we have to decide, like, is this a breathing dysfunction because of a postural issue? Was there a tough thing going on in the birth that's really created a restriction in the body that's not the throat? These guys know I'm real big about cranial base, how you look at the cranial base and how you look at the jaw. Everybody's all concerned about the tongue, but 9.5 times out of 10, when we get that cranial base to where it can, in the cervical spine to do what it needs to do and get the jaw to do what it needs to do, the tongue begins to loosen up and soften and then finally get into its motion, and it's connected to the pelvis. So knowing all of those things makes it so much more pleasant. And we also know this because whenever we get kids that have had multiple releases, that when we go in and we start teaching a mom how to do inversions and we start helping the baby unfurl and we help the mom with her stability, then things begin to shift right before our eyes,
It was interesting. Yesterday I was working with a mom who her baby is very restricted and they are trying to avoid a release at all costs, and really great family. But when the baby latched on, it was fairly painful in the beginning. And I was like, okay, can we try one thing real quick before we relatch her? And I got in her hips, which is what I had learned from Michale, and literally moved her hips a couple inches. And the mom goes, oh, that's no longer painful. So much better. Yeah. And she's like, I have no pain right now.
Wow.
And it's like a lot of people would look at that and they would look at the structure in her mouth and say, yes, she's tied. That needs to be gone. And all we did was give her some more space. We opened her up. We never even had to relatch her. The baby fixed herself. When her hips were open, her chest and neck came open.
The throat opens, the jaw.
This is so interesting. Yeah, because for the people who will listen to this, who have a newborn and they are struggling with breastfeeding and that's their like, I've got a problem, and they're obviously not in Hawaii and they're not blessed to be in distance to you guys that can perform this work in person, like what's something that they can do or be looking for?
So the course, that's a lot.
We're going to pump the course. Everyone do the course immediately.
Plug.
Once a month, and we did this in community last month. We're like, okay, let's invert your baby. And the new mom in the group, we walked her through it and said, do this, put your hand here, move your body this way, and just walked her straight through it. And she was like, oh my goodness, it was a unifying moment of empowerment and freedom and stability, and the angels saying, I don't know, you know what I'm saying? It's like this, you know,
it all just
moment,
came together.
planets lined up, and she went, oh my goodness, this is phenomenal. And I'm like, yes, it's phenomenal. You know, have your moment.
It's totally interesting that you actually mentioned before that the body will do anything it needs to do to be able to breathe. And I recently saw, I think it was probably even yesterday, I saw a little thing pop up because the first time I ever reached out to you, Michelle, was because of my daughter. And I'm sure you probably don't remember the conversation because it was literally years ago. But I'm going to use the story as an example because I always do because I find it so helpful. But basically, like when she was around 2 years old, she just developed mouth breathing. And I was like, alarm bells, what's this all about? And then I noticed she had raging, massive tonsils. And then I later found out she had really restricted nasal passage with massive adenoids. And I was just like, what is going on here? Because I hadn't really noticed it up until that 2-year-old point. Like she definitely had a hard time breastfeeding at the start, but she was my first baby. And I was like, I just don't know what I'm doing here. I think this is just hard because far out, I have no idea what we're doing. And like, you know, I've got no support here. Anyway, persisted and breastfed her for like several years, but it wasn't until then that I noticed a problem with this area. And we kind of did so many other things. We did like oral facial myofascial therapy, like tongue exercises. Like I had her doing these weird breathing things like multiple times a day, which as a 3-year-old, she was just not interested in doing it. It's so stressful just even trying to engage with that type of thing. And then we had so many appointments with so many different like professionals who'd figured it out, and just to no avail change. And her breathing became so bad. She develops like a sleep apnea and snoring, and just like started to get lethargic. Like I could just tell like her little spark was just slowly kind of diminishing. And then every time I spoke to somebody about like myofunctional therapy, they're like, you have to get a release. And I was like, well, you have to get her tonsils taken out. And I was like, it just was a whole body no, but also I'm desperate for change here. So I ended up getting her ties released. And by the way, we'd done like chiro and stuff from birth. Didn't do anything for us. Don't know if it's because it wasn't targeting the right thing. And now that we've done that, almost instantly after her release, where her little lip one was released, her tooth has like aggressively started decaying. And I took her to the dentist, and they were like, oh, this would have happened. This has been happening for years. And I was like, no, because prior to her release, the dentist said she had perfect teeth and no decay. And then as soon as we released, that happened. And yesterday when I saw that post, I was like, whoa, her tooth is almost like nothing left. And this is a matter of like way less than a year. And so that just connected to me. I was like, okay, she's desperately trying to breathe, because none of this has helped. The purpose of all of this was to just help her breathe, and nothing's helped. And now she's started a bio block expander not working. And I'm like, okay, well, what is it? Because we're obviously missing something, and all these people, all these professionals, they're missing the picture, and we can't just cut and snip everything.
Because it's not, you know, the narrative that we're following now is that if we go in and we make the macro airway larger, that somehow that's going to give more space to breathe. I take a very, very, very different approach with this, because these same things, like I was that kid when I was a child, right? The open mouth posture, the large tonsils. And interestingly enough, all of that appeared after a traumatic event. Our family lost everything in a hurricane. And the next year, my school picture looked like that kid, right? Completely drained, traumatized, just living in a moldy house. I mean, the whole thing, right? Not that yours is. I'm just saying that it was that quick for me. And what I'm noticing about the kids is that we have to back way up, and teeth are crystals. They're crystals. If our teeth are beginning to decay and erode, then that tells us that the demineralization, the low pH, all of the systemic metabolic pieces are compensating so hard that we're literally collapsing. We're falling apart, right? And so now we're at a level where the recovery effort is massive. There's so much, and that's why courses like Corey Malloy's Freely Rooted course are so beneficial. We just launched Rooted Families. So you might get some information and what you need out of the Rooted Families community course too. And I say that to everybody because you can go and get appliances, but it's not going to change the metabolism. It's not going to change it's not going to change the family ecology. It's not going to change the patterns that are happening at home that are actually a resource to the child. Now, I'm not projecting that onto you. I don't know your situation. I don't know. But what's happening is the symptomatology, even out of very different situations, are similar. But what's unique and specific is that child's biology and ecology, and that's what has to be uniquely addressed. That specificity there. It's very specific. It's almost like tribal in a way, right? So the amount of resourcing that has to come on for that child to actually begin to engage is enormous. And this is why, if you followed Molly's Instagram, she's had Kua in the water since he was 2 weeks old.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
She told me and weird, it's an ongoing thing. Like, she's like, why? He's not tanning. I'm like, you're missing this. Go get that. And we're constantly working on his body. He never sits still. He's always
moving.
He's always moving. She hands him to me. I'm working with his body. She's doing the same thing. She's doing the same thing. We're like this tribe, the village that's like, bringing all the pieces in for him. And these are the pieces we talk about in the course too. But the question becomes, when you resource a child, it can't just be for a certain amount of time. Like I see some of these Instagram accounts where they're like, spend 30 minutes a day outside. I'm like, no, baby, that's probably not going to be enough for your child. So you're going to have to live outside, and you're going to have to reevaluate your whole damn life. That's just,
It's always the way.
So it's not a prescription. It's a specific to you kind of thing, right? But unless you know what you're looking for to know how to calibrate that, you might miss it. You might go into the prescription language of that. The fix it language, we call it. And I want to say something else too about language. And this is what really makes Midline Revolution unique, is what we've done is we've created a whole other language around what parents are experiencing, because the language of taking a diagnosis out of context for a child feels very abrasive and warlike, and it feels very rough, and it doesn't feel loving, and it doesn't feel kind.
It elicits the emergency.
It elicits the hindbrain to just light up and do anything that it can to fix it and make it stop and go away. And that's not a livable approach. So in Midline Revolution, we use very different language around what we're talking about so that we can begin to calm down, and we can actually recognize where we have our power, and we can begin to do those things, like at least take a step and then take another step and take another step. And the people who have done that have literally seen their lives change in short order by knowing what those calibration points are. And when they're finally hitting those restorative resourcing thresholds, let's call them a threshold.
Yeah. And knowing what they want.
So who they are and where they are, what they want as a family.
And once they get what they want, then what?
They get more.
They get more.
They can ask for more.
Continuing that.
So what's happening now is parents don't even know that, all they want that to do is stop and go away. Mm-hmm. But what they don't know how to do is turn around and face and go for what they really want. A lot of parents don't even know how to say, I want vitality for my child. I want radiance for my child. I want my child to be full of the spirit and full of themselves and full of life and love. They don't even know how to ask for that because they're so focused on what's wrong.
So true.
Parents have, especially mothers, have this like feeling of it's something that they're doing, right? Mm-hmm. Like if there's an issue going on, they think like, what can I do differently? If your baby's gassy, what can I eat differently? And I always tell moms like, food, like throwing away food out of your diet is the last thing that I do with a gassy baby, because as a new mom, you are already so strapped and you're just trying to get any food in your mouth. Like you don't want to think about like not getting certain types of food. You're trying to just survive and keep up. But what I noticed a lot of these moms want, like the Midline Revolution approach, you have to be tough. It's simple things, but you have to be tough and you have to be willing to not just go for the silver bullet, because the silver bullet is really never a silver bullet. Mm-mm. There's always, it might have the appearance of making a change quickly and then something comes up later. A few people, it might just work out and then they're like, oh, it worked out great for me. And that's awesome for them, but that's not the story for everybody else. So with this approach, moms are always like, they're wanting to do like, what can I do to help my baby? And this, what we talk about is almost a way of being. So you're not doing things to your baby, you're being with your baby and you're slowing it way, way, way down. Because when you have a provider say, your baby has a class 4 tongue tie, like you need to go get it released, the alarms go off. And so we don't even say that. We say it without saying it in certain words, but we really want the parents to actually have their own power to make up their own minds. Because if you're putting on this like emergency kind of feeling of what's going on, and you brought up earlier, like if the baby's not gaining weight well, well, those providers are probably not asking about the birth. They're not asking if the baby had, or the mom had a ton of fluids in labor. They're not asking if the baby had any resuscitation after birth. All of those things can affect the way a baby feeds. It's not just a tongue tie that might be the reason why they're not gaining weight. So we're trying to like really like take a step back and like, yeah, but it's hard to be still, right? And to wait.
Well, everything that's true healing is hard. It's really looking at it and evaluating everything and not expecting, here's the pill, here's the snip. You guys are good now. Have a good life.
Can I ask, when people do get their baby's tongues revised, what is the percentage of that actually working and it following through to a good result?
That depends on who you ask.
I'm asking you.
Because they have a 99% success rate.
Of course they do.
Asking an obstetrician, is there such thing as birth trauma? Because if they admit it, they have to fix it, right?
Yeah.
Ask a tongue tie surgeon what their percentage rate is. 100%. Great result. Never have any problem. So there's a very well-known tongue tie provider that says, if I create the wound, I have to give the instructions for the wound care. Okay. In our world, if somebody's going to do a tongue tie release, they're not responsible for the habilitation and the recovery. So they don't know what's happening, past the immediate post-op check period.
Yeah.
Right. And however, some doctors don't even do post-ops. Yeah. They don't even do wound checks. Right? Shame on them. I just said that out loud. Shame on you.
Many doctors are doing a release the day that they see a baby. The baby has an appointment, you get the functional release done.
And they're doing it without a functional exam. Without a feeding exam.
That happened to me recently where they use, I guess like you could go kind of the fear mongering thing. And this mom was there for a consult and the doctor said, well, our schedule is booked 6 weeks out. So we can just do it today. So they make it seem like, oh, you're here. You might as well do it today. And she did it and came in and told me. And I was like, like, it was hard because I'm like, whoa, that baby wasn't ready. And it doesn't mean that the baby's not going to have a good outcome, but it means we got a lot of work ahead of us.
Yeah. It's hard because they like these professionals, unfortunately, they sell the end goal to be 100% positive. And my personal experience of being so concerned about the stories of the negative impact of just leaving it or trying to figure out, like I've spent years trying to figure out like what is the cause? What do I need to change? Like what's going on here? But then when doctors are like, your baby's going to get leukemia, or your child is never going to be able to learn properly, or you're actually putting your child in such great dangers by waiting any longer. And I guarantee you if you get tired, or I guarantee tongue tie release, or I guarantee you if we do the rapid palate expansion, that you're going to have a good success. So let's just do it.
I've heard the story too of like, oh, your baby might be feeding well now, but they've definitely got a tongue tie. And if you leave that until they're a little bit bigger, if you leave it until they're 3 months or 6 months, they're not going to feed well anymore. So we can release it now. And
I just talked to a baby or a mom, her baby's 8 months old, has known oral restrictions top and bottom, 8 months old, and he's 25 pounds, exclusively breastfed.
Yeah. So to make those kind of generalizations, I mean, there is evidence in the literature now. They created a study, to demonstrate that, right? RCT for the win, not really, but this is what we have in imperialistic, scientific, Eurocentric, westernized medicine, right? Is the gold standard of the RCT. So if an RCT says it, then now it's God's voice, literally.
Just for everyone listening, an RCT is random controlled trials.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Random
controlled
right.
trials.
Yeah, cool. It sounded weird when I said it.
That if you wait past 4 months, that breastfeeding rates go down. Is it true for 100% of the people? Obviously not.
There's so much nuance that there's obviously being missed, as per usual.
And I'll just go ahead and say, like some people would say about me, oh, well, she's against the surgery. No, I teach a surgery class. I teach doctors.
She's taught us literally how to go into
surgery.
Yeah.
And do guided release.
We hold the babies.
Yeah.
That are ready for release, that need release, which is not that many.
Well,
Well, that answered Keshia's question earlier of how many babies, once they've gone through this approach or a different approach, or understanding the full spectrum of what's going on or could potentially be going on, hardly ever need a release.
Yeah.
That's what I'm hearing, right?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I would just love to remind all the women that are listening to this, all the mothers that are listening to this, there's an internal calibration that you have when someone speaks something over you, right? So someone gives you a diagnosis. Some people consider that like an incantation of some sorts, right? They're speaking words over you. Yeah. And you have the choice to accept that or to calibrate to something else in your surroundings. And it feels emergent when that is coming on, when that diagnosis is given to you, but you also have the choice to change your narrative. You don't have to accept the narrative that whoever these people are giving to you, whether it's in birth or, whether it's in your infant's young life or whenever your teenager is dealing with the diagnosis, whatever, you get to calibrate to how you want to be with that information. You still get to choose. So I know we can always we like to villainize our providers or whoever we're choosing based on what they're saying and kind of create that drama in our lives.
But it's not about them. It's about us.
Yeah.
Like I tell people all the time, I'm like, it's information, not good, bad, right, or wrong. You get to decide what you're going to do with it. And then the parent power is always the same. Resource your child, create movement in the child, create movement in your own body, calibrate that movement together, get somebody who understands how to open posture at the breast so the child can breathe and focus on feeding, and then do a functional exam before, do a functional exam however long later. You might need an a short-term, mid-term, and long-range feeding plan. So you might need a short-term plan to at least get the movement installed and all the things happening. And then you might go to this feeding plan the more the child opens up. And a qualified practitioner is going to evaluate orally what's happening with every step of the way. And then you can always go get a release.
So are we missing something? Are we missing something with because I actually believed that this was like a relatively new thing happening to babies, but then a midwife who I know who's much older said that they used to just back in the day cut this stuff before the parents even really knew about it, which is in like beyond me. And but then
we actually talked about that. There's a lot of power in not making something a huge deal.
Yeah.
Like what if we had a baby that was presented to us and we noticed that there was restriction and the body seemed open and there was tightness in the frenums and we just snipped it and we moved on? Like what would that create?
Yeah.
Would there be a different potential healing outcome based on the drama surrounding the entire scenario and the regulation of the mom baby dyad? It could be a totally different story.
Yeah, because that's the power of language, right? Is when you take that out of context and you make a diagnosis and then you put the diagnosis over here and you create a language of urgency and desperacy and uncertainty, and you don't return the power back to the parents, then it feels very out of context. It feels very confusing. So language really does matter.
So is there anything that's actually causing this to happen in the first, like what's actually causing it? Because a lot of people who are more nutrition, dietetics focused will say that it's, all these ties and stuff are caused by synthetic, like,
acid.
And, a bunch of other things. Like, does that add up for you guys, or is it something that we're really just missing that's not really been addressed?
That question presumes that if we did the thing we thought was wrong, that this problem would stop. But this has been with us
since the
beginning, let's say. Okay, earliest records are that,
Moses.
in sacred and ancient texts, we have evidence that this existed since, let's call it the beginning of humans. I don't know. I'm just going there. What we're saying is that if we're preventive, we can stop it. If we figure out what's wrong and we fix it, then it'll stop. But history doesn't indicate that, right? So when we start talking about things like, oh, it's MTHFR and it's deficiencies and it's this and this and this, probably, and. You'll never hear me say or. Because I hold as many possibilities in the same capacity at one time as I can, because you know why? It gives me more possibility when I do that. So it's possible that it's MTHFR. It's possible that it's toxins. It's possible that it's birth trauma. It's possible that it's
folic acid.
Thank you. Give me another one. Name all.
So if we say that it's probably all of those things, which I can totally understand and I totally can take that on board as a hell yeah. But did we do things differently? Like, and that just cancels out the midwife just going ahead and doing it without you even knowing, or did we treat our babies differently? Previously,
all these babies were born with tongue ties, lip ties, mouth ties, and they survived.
They were fine. Like breastfeeding was the only option, and they seem to have, perfect jaws. Like, let's talk indigenous for a second. Perfect jaws, perfect everything. Is it because we put them in carriers? Is it because we put them in car seats? Is it because we put them in these little weird cushion pillows that we don't go outside? Like, is this a factor? Like, what's going on there?
I'll throw you an anomaly. My fourth born at home in the call, tied to the tip. I didn't know he was tongue-tied until he was in his teens, and he came in one night after doing algebra homework and sat beside me and laid back in my lap and started talking to me about something. And I was like, you're tied to the tip. Holy cow. I had breastfed him for 2 years. He had no malocclusion. He was beautiful. His posture was amazing. He's an anomaly. But is he? I don't know. You know, but all the things they say that happens when somebody's fully tongue-tied, that was not his case. Not the kid laying in my lap looking up at me. It was just beautiful.
And tied, just for those listening, tied to the tip is like when you get that love heart shape in the tongue. Is that, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll just highlight too, Michale lived, the way she mothered and raised her children was really outside of, it was very indigenous.
Very out of the norm, yeah.
Outside of the normal societal pieces. And I think when you're bringing up the indigenous piece, it's huge. It's like, we don't have the village support. It is different birthing a baby now. It is different who gets to like hold your baby right after they come out, like after they emerge. It's different who gets to love on them, how they carry them. All of that has completely changed. And then you can go into the energetic pieces of like, yeah, we're never outside. And yeah, the husbands do leave the house and the moms have to like carry everything. And then we create life with that energetic, right? So it's like that perpetuates continually. And if we do bring back the indigenous pieces, like what are the threads you want to pull through? That's a question for every mom. Like what threads do you want to pull through from the way that humans used to live?
Yeah, I mean, it's a given that we are a mismatch for our environment now. So the question becomes, from an ecological perspective, what corrections want to be made in order to help us match to our environment so that we can be fully expressed epigenetically and fully expressed genetically human and fully human, right? So that, once again, looking at all the possibilities of why this is happening puts me in a move away from strategy. But if I turn around and say, you know what, I'm going to like, this was 30 years ago. I'm cooking on a wood stove, wood heating my home, ordering organic food in bulk, feeding, you know, my freezer with local grass-fed beef and having salmon shipped in from Alaska.
And your kids lived outside.
Yeah, we lived out, and they lived outside. And
sounds
I kept
like
the
my
house
dream life, by the way.
Sounds like what
I'm pretty much. I'm almost there. I'm almost there. It's just the wood stove thing.
I recreated my childhood. A dad that hunted and fished. We had an acre garden. My mom canned it. We lived in a house that did not have heat or air. And in the winter we had fires, and in the summer we sweated. And we did not acclimate to comfort. It wasn't a thing. And I recreated that for my kids.
I feel like, Michale, what you're saying, like a lot of what you're saying is just kind of leading to recalibrating the nervous system. And if we can recalibrate the nervous system of like the organism that is a family, and then the mother and then the child, it frees up a lot of that tissue and a lot of the function. So just to bring that all together, it feels like a really big piece in this whole discussion that we're just trying to...
I'll just add this, that a lot of that doesn't have to be done in a Western mindset. It can be done from who you are as a human. Who I am as a human is very foundational. It's very basic. It's very traditional. That's my whole, like, that's what flows out of my cells. It's who I am as a person. And so I'm very sure about that. And this is one of the reasons we're doing the containers that we do, the communities that we do, is because we want to help and assist parents to fully express who they are and where they are here now on the planet, so that they can see their children thrive. They're not just constantly trying to fix their children, so that they can shift out of an outsourcing mentality and dig way into resourcing, so that the plant with complicated emotions naturally regulates their nervous system, naturally integrates their reflexes, naturally does all these things that all these providers are willing to do for you and take your money for. There's a natural way to do that. Kids are no longer climbing the walls and, you know, like doing scary things safely, right? They're not doing that anymore. But more and more we're seeing parents who are willing to take a throwback and reach back into the ancient and pull it forward and make it work for them because it worked for millennia.
And when I first went through everything with Michale, I was shocked at how simple all of it really is. And that's the thing. I think a lot of people are overthinking everything. And in this day and age, we have access to so much information. So you can like Google one thing and it's like, it takes you down a rabbit hole for 3 hours. Back in the day, they didn't have that. They had their aunties or their sisters or whoever being like, oh yeah, my baby did that too. Like it's normal. But like, when we go back to like this world, like what I'm always reminded of is the simplicity of how to just like be and live. It's not that complicated.
It's really not. And we like, I mean, it's no different to being like, you know, we should just go to sleep when the sun isn't out anymore. It just makes a lot of sense. Maybe we shouldn't be awake all night, but it has to be like scientifically proven to get to just be like, hey, you know what? In summer, maybe we should like what's growing in the garden as opposed to like, what am I shipping in? Or like, it's the simple things. And it's always like when we really break it down, like this is the answer. It's not groundbreaking or anything.
It's not. And it's actually very disturbing in the simplicity of it, because how can that possibly, you know, when we take away all the complexity, how can that possibly sustain us? And I'm here to tell you very well, because even before I knew about, you know, circadian rhythms, let's say, the house that I lived in where we had a wood stove in the kitchen, I had oil lamps that I lit at night instead of lights.
Overhead lights.
Overhead lights. We did not use overhead lights.
So
this
great.
is the modern era. Hello, and I'm not Amish. I'm not playing. You know what I'm saying?
But it could help anyone.
What I saw in my children was calm and beautiful. My kids slept. They slept. We didn't have a TV till my oldest was 16. They worked outside. They drove tractors and all kinds of stuff, right? We unschooled and I fed them like racehorses, and we worked together as a family and did all of those things before it was cool now. You know, I call my kids of the shutdowns and I'm like, you guys got this? And they're like, we're good. We don't need, we good, Mom. Thank you now. They hated me then, but they're like, thank you, Mom. We love you.
Oh, it's so true.
How ridiculously simple it is that actually produces the greatest feedback and results.
Got to exit the matrix and just take your shoes off and go out in the sun. I mean, who'd have thought that it was just that simple?
Can I ask one? We might have time for more, but one more question. When you do see a baby that has a pretty strong tie, wherever that is in their mouth, and is struggling to feed, and and you know, mum's stressed, dad's stressed, baby's stressed out. Say we've got a family in that position, what would be your first point of call, and when do you call it to go and get a release?
The first thing I do is I don't call it a tie.
Okay.
Language. Watch your mouth.
Sorry. Not a tie. There's distress.
The baby's crying a lot. Baby's hungry.
Watch your mouth. So here's what I say is I'm like, this is tight. This is restricted. This, you know,
short.
It's short. Look, this isn't moving in the places that we want it to move. Here's what we're going to do to get things moving. And then we're going to reevaluate. Because in my world, clinically, I write notes that reflect a functional deficit. I identify it because that is what we're correcting, not the frenulum. We're correcting the deficit of function. And when you identify it properly and correctly, you're correcting the movement. It's not about the appearance. It's about the movement. So when you focus on things that actually can be habilitated and looked at and engaged with in a calm way, it completely changes the vibe and tone. So the first thing we do is we don't call it a tie. And that doesn't mean it's not being diagnosed. It means that we're loving these people to keep them calm and also giving them the next thing, because they could go to any dentist down the street and somebody will tell them it's a tie. Right.
And to piggyback off what Michelle's saying, another thing that we have integrated into our work based on what Michelle teaches is assessing whether what's happening orally is a reason or a response. Right. So is the appearance, the structure, the tightness, the tautness, whatever in the mouth causing your symptoms, or is it a response to what's happening in the body or environmentally? Right. So those are like all the things you get to pick through. Is it causing it, or can we just correlate it?
And that's where like we like to work together, because if I've identified a functional deficit and the way that a breastfed baby is sucking, I want to make sure that Molly has also seen that baby's body, because if the baby's like this and they're sucking funky and they appear to have a short frenum, I think if we can figure this out and get them loose thinner, you're going to see a little bit of a difference in the mouth. So what we do is what Michelle calls sequencing of care. So we try to identify where, like Molly was saying, like where is the issue originating from? Is it truly because the frenum is what's causing the problem? Or is it because the baby had a traumatic birth and they're like this and their body needs to be a little bit unwound? And then once their body's unwound and able to move, then they can move their head and their neck and their tongue and their jaw and all of that. But we try to like sequence it to the point of like, if I was working with a baby, I don't like to send them for release until Molly or Michelle has seen that baby and checked their bodies and made sure there's nothing remaining. But if we get to a point where we've been working with the baby, we're seeing great changes in the baby's body, and yet there's still these symptoms, or say their symptoms are getting worse, or you've plateaued and you're not getting quite where you need to be, that's kind of where we determine, okay, would there be a benefit to releasing this tissue, because we've done everything that we can along the way and we're not quite right where we need to be.
And at that tipping point too is when we go in and assess, like, what's the family's paradigm for life in general?
What's their belief system?
What is their belief system? Are they full on medical system?
Yeah.
Okay. Like, we can get behind this. If this is remaining and this is how you want to go for it, like, let us support you 100% in this, because your belief in that
is important.
It's important. And that's what belief in. And so if you're totally anti-frenectomy, we're not going to even offer that as a suggestion until you can't do it on your own, if that's where we had to go with it, right?
And even we've had so many moms that are like, oh, somebody told me that my baby needed a release and it was a no for me. Kind of like you said with like
whole body no. Yeah.
Whole body no.
If it's a no, we honor that. And then we'll work with them. And, you know, maybe the baby gets to the 80%. Maybe they get 80% improvement and the family's okay with that. Like, they're like, I know that I will do anything it takes except a frenectomy. So we'll get them as far as they can. And yet if we have another family who's like, I want to do this as holistic as possible, but I'm open to having a procedure if needed, it's going to go different with both families.
That's so important. Yeah, I think that's absolutely incredible, and something that so many practitioners could definitely take on board. There's going to be a lot of people listening to this who have gone down the path, and I'm one of those people who did that out of, you know, feeling just dire and desperate and needing to see or wanting to relieve my child a little bit. But no, like, I know that I wish I didn't do that. And I know there's probably a lot of parents who feel the same way, like coming to know that there's a different side to it. Like, they just feel like a bit of regret or a little bit sad that they did that to their child. Should they or could they do something to support what has happened to the child? Because obviously they've just, the whole cut and snip approach. And you know, Michelle, your experience of that being a complete collapse of so much, maybe it's not as obvious as to a child that there has been a collapse, or there is like a bigger problem behind closed doors. what can we do to kind of support that perhaps invisible problem that it may have created?
You want to go with that?
Sure. Firstly, I was going to say to this prompt, that is an invitation. Your decision is an invitation into deepening your intuition, if that's what needs to happen. Whatever road your decision led you down, it's an invitation to take that and evolve and grow from that, right? And there are also a lot of things that you can do for your kids. So you're not helpless. You're not in this space where there's like you did something wrong. You get to decide how you want to take that scenario, and then you get to move towards what else you want if there's something else that you want. And I think we've just hit on it like many times, but we'll talk about it again, is like resourcing your child and your family is going to be the number one thing we always suggest to take you out of any type of fight or flight situation, hindbrain, blaring the alarm bells. Oh shit, I did this. Oops, sorry, I don't know if we can cuss.
Okay, it's fine. We swear a lot.
I did this to my kid. Now what do I do? Like all the shame, guilt, all the mom layer things. It's like resource yourself now, and then get still and quiet. And then from there, decide as a unit, as a family unit, as a mother, however you need to decide, but decide like, where are you going? What are you looking towards? Okay, so we did this in the past, and I can take this, and I can be here in the present with this. But what am I looking towards? What else do you want?
And always remembering, because I brought up earlier that moms always have so much guilt, I always tell moms, you did the best you could with the information and support that you had at that time. So you can always play the game of like, oh, if I would have just known about you guys, or if I would have just done this, or I would have just done that, that's not the reality of what happened. So the reality was you took the information that was given to you. You are a mom, you know what's best for your child. And you took that information and everything that was presented, you made the best decision that you could at that time. And that's what I always try to remind people of, is like Molly said, like you can move forward from that, but don't beat up yourself about it, because you're a good mom no matter what. Like you're a good mom. You're doing what's best for your child and what you believe to be best. And your choices you're going to make for your children are going to change all the time.
Yeah. It's okay to change your mind.
Yeah.
I think we just forget about that. Yeah. It's okay to like pivot. If something doesn't resonate anymore, like I'm going to go the other way. Great.
Well, that's the thing too that I always say is, in the West and Western thinking, especially with the enculturation of school, is that there can only be one answer. There can only be one correct answer. And that's not true. There can be multiple options. And we can say and instead of or but. But, along the lines of forgiveness, I went through that in my own journey too, of forgiving myself for doing this to myself. And I crawled out of that hospital 11 days later and couldn't stand up straight, and spent the next 3 months with drains and had 3 surgeries and 13 holes in my abdomen and lost 25 pounds and didn't recognize myself. I was alone beginning again and had to build it all back and offer major, major forgiveness for myself. And so a lot of the approach that we take is what I learned about coming back from the dead. It's like, this is the way to rebuild.
I think it's a good reminder too for everyone that no matter what we've faced, the body has such an incredible capacity to heal. And that goes for our children. It goes for our family units. It goes for absolutely everything. So
we're so wise.
I'm okay.
Your bodies are so wise and we are so intelligent, but we are so disconnected from it.
Such a common theme.
That is the thing. It's the return. And this is what the Western allopathic system has done. It's disconnected us from ourselves. And so now we're helpless. We think we're helpless, like we don't know. But we really do. We really do know. It's just that we don't trust ourselves to know. And like even the whole field of obstetrics has separated a mom's wisdom from herself and her ability to make decisions from herself for the sake of, quote, safety, so that you don't do any harm. But it's not true. That's not true. I free birth. I didn't free birth. I natural birthed in multiple different, ways. My first two were almost unassisted in the hospital. The third was at home. The fourth was at a midwife, and the fifth one we broke into a hospital. I mean, just like whatever it was that we needed to do, we did it. And I natural birthed all 5 of them in various types of situations, and then of course watched Molly, do her thing with Kua. And so we are wise, we are intelligent, we have our answers inside. We just don't trust it anymore.
Definitely. And it's definitely something that we talk about a lot. We share a lot of free birth stories, and there's definitely a common theme of just really coming back to what we innately know and having to trust that. And it's a journey home.
Well, that self-responsibility that it takes to go on the journey of free birth, even the idea,
Yeah.
especially as a number, like your first baby, even that idea, what does that bring up in you? And that's the same thing that's going to be brought up whenever your baby faces a lip and tongue tie or have breastfeed. Like all of that whole scenario is the same innate, that you need to trust in that. And that's take back the responsibility.
That's one of the things we do in the course too, is we're like, congratulations, you've got your first opportunity to learn the process of trusting yourself and asking intelligent questions.
We're happy you're here.
We're happy you're here. Welcome, because just like you experienced with your child, the quote, most of the mainstream would look at it and go, oh, well, they had undiagnosed ties. So now they've got tonsils and adenoids and all that. Those two things can be completely unrelated. They can be.
Yeah, 100%.
And what happens is now you've got that, and the next thing's going to be an early interceptive orthodontic appliance, and then myofunctional therapy, and then integrating reflexes, and then the body piece, and then when's it going to stop? When's that child going to be perfect and whole and taught to trust their own intelligence and learn about their body and what it means to be in full expression and completely thriving? When do we get there? And so what we've done is we've backed it up and said, no, we start now with that. Wait, we do this now, and then you go make decisions about where you need outsourced help.
And everybody's decision tree is going to be different.
It's going to be different.
That's what we love. It's like we work with so many different moms across so many different spectrums, and we try to start and then let them follow their own path.
Guys, your work is incredible.
This has been amazing.
I'm sure so many people will have listened to this and just be like, oh, I knew it. I knew there was something.
I want them to take the breath and just be still with themselves and trust and love themselves and know that they have the intelligence and the wisdom already within them, and not overwhelm themselves with information and not shut themselves down. That they're going to be okay.
Yeah.
So important.
Well, thank you guys so much for coming and chatting with us. And you've got so much beautiful knowledge. I feel like this work is so important, even though it's so simple.
Where can our listeners find you guys if they need to delve more into this? Yeah.
Everybody go and do the course.
Yeah. Please share.
You can find us on Instagram, Midline Revolution.
Yeah, Midline Revolution on Instagram. We don't answer questions via email. So we don't coach and give tips and tricks and all that stuff.
And diagnose.
No. But you can find us on Instagram. You can do the course. You can come into the community.
We have two courses. Well, we have 2 courses. So we have the Evolution of Lip and Tongue Tie. That's the flagship course. And that's where you're going to get information about this entire season, the lip and tongue tie season that moms are in. And you're going to be able to get information on how to move your baby, how to breastfeed a functionally deficit baby. And then we have another course, the breastfeeding course, which slows everything way down. It's a drip course over 5 weeks. And that is for moms that are trying to take themselves out of the emergent situation and really want to just connect with their baby and create connection. Seek answers internally instead of outsourcing. So we have those 2 courses. And then Tuesday, on October 22nd or 24th. I don't know when this is going to be released.
Probably in about 6 weeks.
Okay. Yeah, we won't even mention that.
Yeah. Okay. I was going to say we could actually do a little shout out, but we could still do that.
Yeah.
I don't even know what date it is, to be completely fair. I'm like October 24. I don't even know. Yeah.
Next Tuesday. But are you doing a day ahead of us?
Yeah. It's Friday
it's
for
Friday.
us. Yeah.
Okay. So fun. Yeah, that is fun. You're in the future.
Yeah.
It's really fun when I've got to organize the Calendly links.
Yes.
Well, thank you. I can't even do daylight savings time.
Yeah. Oh, well, we're in different time zones at the moment because she's daylight savings and I'm just up the road, which is not. And so my brain, I'm like, I can't function like this. But anyway, thank you guys so much for the time.
You guys were to say anything on the 24th in America.
25th for us then. Yep.
We're doing a webinar. It's a 2-hour webinar that kind of dives deep into what each of our courses offer. We're going to do some breastfeeding positions like live, and then we're going to do movement positions live, and then we're going to have a Q&A because a lot of people just have questions on what the course is. So it's just a 2-hour webinar if anyone wants to join.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, we can definitely share that on our Instagram and get the word out, because I feel like that's just information that everyone should hold, whether you've had tongue ties or not. Sorry, restrictions or not. Oh,
I'm going to hit her. I'll slap her later.
Restrictions.
Thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. Have a beautiful evening. We'll chat soon.
Thanks for tuning in to the Road to Wisdom podcast. To join the journey, you can follow us on Instagram at theroadtowisdom.podcast and at www.theroadtowisdompodcast.com. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. We look forward to seeing you next week with more juicy content.